You could do
And I had a second part to that.
the city, like any of this city ones, and it's a little bit cheaper, and they take it right out of your paycheck.
That, the facility's a lot better.
Teachers,
It's much
schools
better.
where they're having
Has a hot
more
tub, has a jacuzzi, has a little tiny, like not lap pool, but just, yeah. So usually when I get done, I just go into the steam
And they
room.
keep it clean too.
They keep it clean.
Has it started raining yet?
It's pouring.
Unfortunately,
I thought it sounded
it's
like
raining
it, but
sideways.
was that road there?
I just didn't email
So
that.
like umbrella did nothing.
Geronimo saying,
It's like it's coming from the ground.
see the email Geronimo
I
saying,
gave up on
one of your
umbrellas and just went
classes,
to rain jackets.
every
and
kid has a dress.
Every kid has what?
Can't trade that.
I'm jealous of the people with the umbrella.
It's,
The percentages is different, that's all.
yeah,
So
it's, our girl down there,
like
she got herself jacked up.
it folds upwards. So like
So
It's fourth period.
Yeah.
I told kids, don't worry.
I know, it's because he sent out the F report,
It is
It just needs to be filled, right?
the phone call, but that's every year, but like, they were all like, how is my kid only average one?
I told them, I said, guys, the categories are
I didn't
jacked
know
up
they made it
percentages.
that big.
And I've been looking, trying to figure out where is the error at, and
And it's always
I'll
somewhere
find
else.
it.
It's
I
somewhere
know,
else.
I'm not concerned, I just, the Geronimo, you call these parents back. Call them all, let them know.
well, I told the kids that, I said, guys, it's just look at the ones that are great. That other, it doesn't matter.
all that
It doesn't- I said, guys, it doesn't make sense.
My daughter's in a class at FSW where the guy starts you off at a 0. Never heard of this. You start at a 0. And then your grade goes up with each assignment. So if you get 5 points, now you have a 5. Never heard of that. So he told them, he goes,
New man?
if you have a 90, when you go into the final, you don't have to show up. You got an hour.
I like that.
So she's like, I am going for a 90.
It's very
She's like, I am
incentive
going
and
for it.
motivating.
I was like, that's different though.
It is different.
That is different.
It changes the mindset.
You always have a chance. You got a
Well,
chance.
it's just having you start at the bottom and work your way up, you know what I mean?
Actually, when you think about it, it actually makes
Yeah,
a
we
lot
can
more
get started. They're
sense
just gonna
because
be a little late due to the
I'm
weather.
thinking about,
And in an
grading
emergency,
these
they have to
kids, and
deal
I
with
would
the
have
district
kids that
office.
they thought that they had an 86, but I didn't put in the
Okay,
quiz
we're gonna
score.
go ahead and get started. We may have people trickling in due to the weather, which is very understandable. So they'll just pick up where they come in. We did put the sign-in sheet there. I think all you guys signed it. Okay, before we get started today, Mr. Lewis has an announcement that he would like to make.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Based on the request of our membership who wanted to get a bird's eye view into the process, we are recording today's meeting, and we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. There are some signs that are conspicuously posted, and we just wanted you to be aware of that.
Can we receive a copy of the recording, please?
It will be broadcast on our YouTube channel, but I will send you a link
Send me
once
a
it
link.
goes up.
Thank you.
Okay, we have an agenda. Although short, it is an agenda. I kept a little clips for weight.
There you go.
First thing, let's confirm our next two meetings. We have meeting 5 will be Wednesday, September the 14th at the district office at 4:30. And meeting 6 will be September the 28th here at the CCEA office at 4:30. Is that what you have?
Yep.
Okay, we have,
So I would just like an amendment to the agenda because you started the union negotiations yesterday. We would like to have an opportunity, since you got up from the table, before we had the opportunity to address some of your comments and concerns. we have some information that we would like to share, and then we can go back to whatever proposals you want to put on
All right,
it.
so you want us to switch 2 and 3?
Yes, please.
That's not a problem.
Okay. So just to get started, at the wasn't really the conclusion of negotiations yesterday. It was abruptly ended, and I appreciate the passion that you put into your dialogue about the salary proposal that was on the table. But part of collective bargaining is negotiating, and those proposals are to be negotiated. And you signed off on ground rules that you would bargain in good faith, in the spirit of good faith, in alignment with 447, and also in number 12 of the ground rules, that both parties would agree to negotiate and not attack personalities or violate the grounds for closing that day's negotiation session. So we did have questions, and part of negotiation is working in good spirit. And to just share with you from PERC, good faith bargaining includes, but not limited to, the willingness of both parties to meet reasonable times and places as mutually agreed upon in the order to discuss issues which are proper subjects of bargaining with the intent of reaching a common accord. It includes an obligation of both parties to participate actively in the negotiations with an open mind and a sincere desire, as well as making sincere effort to resolve differences and come to an agreement. In determining whether a party has failed to bargain in good faith, PERC would make that determination. And I'm not saying that that was the case, but these are the agreements that we came to. So we did have to speak with your director about some of the requests we had of information about proposals that you had put on the table. That is the opportunity that we give you to ask those questions and to provide and for us to provide information to you. So I am going to have John share some financial information and misinformation that you may have about our funding and the way that we generate funds, and understanding that we put proposals on the table so we can have dialogue. So John, would you like to share?
Thank you, Don. So just some of the comments that were made yesterday, I just want to clarify. You know, we have two main funding sources for us. We have our operating general fund and we have our capital fund. So our operating fund is what pays our teacher salaries. That's what pays the utilities. That's what pays for basically the operational needs of our district. We also have our capital fund. Our capital fund pays for school renovations, new schools, maintenance, you know, the ongoing maintenance of our buildings. You mentioned yesterday new high school GGG is being paid for completely. That is correct, and something we're very proud of. We've funded it from our capital side, and we've been saving for years in order to be able to do that. In the past, we haven't always been able to do that, and we have had to take out debt, and many counties have to take out debt and loans in order to pay for their schools. Sometimes they even have to do referendums, and that's something like Lee County did. They had to take out a referendum in order to pay for their capital projects. But we have been fortunate where we have had the capital funds available to save for our future schools. We've also been able to pay, as you mentioned, our debt. We will be debt-free by 2026, something else that a lot of school districts cannot say, and something that we are very proud of as well. And so we will be debt-free in 2026, and that is also being funded out of our capital side, because when we took out those loans, it was for schools in the early 2000s. So I just wanted to clarify that, because you can't just take funds from, unfortunately, we have stipulations and there's statutes and laws that we can't shift funds from capital to operating unless you have approval. And fortunately, our community and our taxpayers did give us some flexibility. In 2020, we were able to put a tax-neutral referendum out. So no new taxes for our community, but it allowed us to shift 0.35 millage from our capital to our operating. And so that did provide us some flexibility with our funding. And fortunately, because of that, it has prevented us from being deficit spending. So we're now entering year 2 of that referendum, which has shifted some of that money to operating and allowed us not to be in the red. It's what's going to allow us to be able to negotiate is the fact that we had that referendum. So we're going on year 2 of year 4 of that referendum. Our hope is in the future, especially since we still have some negotiating to do, that in the future when we get to year 4, hopefully we go back out to the community and get it approved again, because it is tax neutral and it gives us that flexibility to be able to maintain our staffing levels, our programs, and deliver excellence at our schools. If we did not have that referendum, we would have to make some substantial cuts in our staffing. So we're very proud of that referendum. Something that was mentioned yesterday was like a Charlotte County, I think it was 52, just so that you're aware, how is Charlotte able to do that? They also have a referendum, but they did a referendum that is not tax neutral. So what they did is they put a referendum as a 1-point millage. So what that does is for every 1,000 of your property value, they tax an additional $1. So you can imagine property values have gone up quite a bit. Those taxes that they're going to be generating are going to be substantial. And when they made that when they made that referendum, they wrote into it that it's going to be for competitive salaries. And so they are going to be able to be using a majority of that referendum for supporting those increases. So they're going to be generating some additional money because of that referendum. And I believe their referendum was also about 4 years. So after the 4 years is done, hopefully they renew it as well. Otherwise, they'll probably be in a situation where they can't continue to support those salary increases. What some other districts have done too is when they do these referendums, they then make it, when they increase the salary, they'll make it like a supplement. So when the referendum goes away, it might not be permanent. So that's not something we're interested in. And we're also not interested in raising taxes. And that's one of the reasons why we did the tax neutral referendum, because we live in Collier County, and a lot of the homes here do have higher property values, and so compared to other districts, our capital budget is pretty healthy. Where other districts, they might not have the same ability to be tax neutral and to shift funds from capital to operating. We do have that flexibility, and so that's why we did that. And we're going to want to continue to do that because, like, as I mentioned, in 2026, we're going to be debt-free. Since we're debt-free, we'll have a little bit more money in the capital, so we want to continue to be able to shift the money from capital to operating to support our salary increases moving forward. But that'll be up to taxpayers and voters at the next election. So I wanted to mention that. Also, you had asked about our reserves. So just so that you're aware, these are the different reserve accounts that we have. We have a reserve for low performing schools. We have a reserve for FTE audits. We have a reserve for FTE shortfall and proration. We have a reserve for enterprise software. That's our term system. I don't know if you're familiar with our term system. We replaced terms for our student information system and got focus. For our accounting, finance, human resources, everything, we still use this antiquated piece of software, terms. It's a mainframe, literally a green screen, designed before the mouses were even utilized. So it's a very antiquated system. So we have a reserve set aside because we do want to replace that system in the near future when we find a suitable replacement. As you mentioned, we have our strategic reserve, which is 5% of our general fund. As you mentioned, the state requires 3%. We're quite proud, and the board approved us to have 5%. It makes us more financially sound. It helps with our ratings if we were ever to go try to get a loan, say if we're in trouble and we need to get bonds or anything like that, it makes your district's rating higher. And we also have the future budget shortfall reserve. That future budget shortfall reserve was established many years ago to allow the district in years where, say there might be a recession, say there might be something looming in the future, you have those funds set aside for when those times come. You can, for example, the last basically at least 4 years, we've had to dip in to those budget shortfall reserves as I mentioned, the only reason we're not tapping into it right now is because of the referendum. But if we did not have that referendum, we probably would be tapping into it this year as well. So those are some of our reserves. As I mentioned, the importance of the budget shortfall reserve is also in the future years. Say if for some reason we don't get the referendum approved in the next round by voters, we will then have to tap into that future budget shortfall reserve.
Which by law now has to go to the general election. It was earlier, you could do it in August, now
Primary.
you have to go to the primary election, which is a little bit harder to pass a referendum through.
Yeah, even though you advertise tax neutral, sometimes they just, if you're not out there getting the word out, they might misconstrue it. We also have been fortunate in the last, since the pandemic, the federal government has provided additional stimulus funding to us. We refer to it as CARES and ESSER and ARP. You may have heard some of those terms. Those have also provided us opportunities to use those funds instead of our funds to purchase things, laptops, additional staff supports, extended school day, et cetera, things that we would not have been able to fund otherwise. Well, that's going to expire. Those funds are, I believe, end of 2024. So there may be some of those things that we want to continue. And if you want to continue it, we're going to have to, have the funds for it. And there's things that it's paying for right now that is saving us on the operating side, but as soon as it goes away, we're going to have to pick it back up. In addition, we also have, as you mentioned, a new high school opening up. We have GGG that is right around the corner, going to open up in August 2023. We paid for the capital, now we have to pay for the operating. So a new facility, you have to pay for the maintenance, the electricity, all that stuff that you didn't have before. On top of that, there's going to be additional staffing that you have to staff up for. Some of them, we don't have to hire necessarily all new teachers because a lot of those students and teachers are going to be moving in from other schools. It's not like all of a sudden we got all these students coming from, out of the ground. They're going to be shifting from some of our other high schools, and accordingly, the staff will be shifting as well, should they want to. And but on top of that, there's some staffing that a new high school gets that we didn't have before. New principal, office manager, secretary, data entry, facility manager, ELL tutors, the things that we didn't have at the school that we're going to shift. Those are things that a school needs, and you can't shift it from somewhere else. So those are some of the things. We also have to be able to maintain whatever salary negotiations we do now. So whatever we commit to in this round, we're going to have to pay for that next year and the year after, and next year we're going to want to negotiate again, and all of a sudden it becomes compounding. So we have to keep that into account, and we also have to prepare for the potential that a recession might come in the future. You might have property values that decrease. Right now we're at a peak, but we don't know how long that's going to be maintained, and we also don't know what kind of impact that might have on our student enrollment. And a comment that was made yesterday was that the Collier County government is giving their staff 10% increase. It's not comparing apples to apples. We are a school system. Our funding is quite different than a government. We are funded based on students. The Collier County government is not. They're funded based on their tax roll, property values, things of that nature. And so we can't compare the two. I think that's all I have to say.
And then you mentioned some increases of comparing teachers don't have the opportunity for increases the way that some district office folks do. And over the last 7 years, we have negotiated 22.55% increases for the CCEA unit. And that's from 2014-15 to now. Teachers do have an opportunity. I was a teacher 16 years, and I aspired. And I know you used my salary as a comparison. So the same 7 years that I stepped out of a principal role into the district office, mine was a 20.52% increase, and plus it was a promotion to an associate superintendent. And I can contend that that is a big job for a district this size, And comparatively of, if you want to compare apples to apples for human resources executives in the area, my salary is much lower than it would be in any other industry, including the county and the city. So, but I know you used a personal and we
That's
really.
because you asked.
I
You asked me to
I understand,
provide
but
you with a name.
I am sharing with you the comparative increases because non-bargaining doesn't necessarily always get the same increases that teachers and Lyle to review the budget and answer any questions that they may have had specifically about our budget with them. We did that, I don't know, May. So we're not trying to hide anything. We just wanted to be clear so that everyone understood kind of the buckets of what we do. And John does the presentations to the board and the board approves where and how that budget looks.
When you say that the money goes to the charter school, that FTE money goes there, if they go or they go to a private school or whatever, I asked this question because I've gotten several students already back in my classroom from the charter school. Does that FTE money come back to us as well?
Yes.
Or a proration of that?
It depends. So we have two, the state, and this is how they do it, not that I agree with it, but they have two survey periods where they look to see where the student is located. So they have survey 2, which is in October, and survey 3, which is in February.
Okay.
If that student is in your class in October during that week, you get 0.5. If they're there in February, you get another 0.5. You get 1.0 if that student's there in October and February.
Okay.
If that student is not there in October, but they're there in February, you get 0.5 on FTE. And now, to complicate matters more, depending on the student, you might get more. If it's an ELL student, you might get a little bit more. If it's an ESC student, you'll get more. If, if it's a virtual student, you might not get much. Because virtual students, it's based on whether they, not only if they're there in October and February, but whether they complete the course.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different variables, but yes, I'm happy to hear that you've recruited some students back.
Yeah, I always
And-
ask, where are you coming from?
Yeah.
Oh, that charter school.
Yeah,
I'm like,
so it
I
makes a
was
difference.
here last year, but I'm back now.
Yeah.
Didn't take very long.
Just tell them to stay through February.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have questions before we move on? Steve?
Yes, thank you for your explanations for everything. I was wondering about Glades County. They were able to pull up their starting salary to $50,000. So any insights on how they were able to do that?
I haven't looked directly at Glades. I know they have probably about 3,000 students in the entire Glades. So it's a little difficult to compare us to them. I know that they're probably struggling even to staff. For example, Glades, as you know, we opened up Glades Technical College over there as a satellite campus for Immokalee Technical College. Why would we do that? Because we got a grant from the state, a job growth grant that provided us funding, Collier County funding, to help Glades, because Glades wanted to have a post-secondary education but could not afford it and could not staff it. They didn't have the expertise, and so they looked to a neighboring county to see if, we've got a Immokalee Technical College, we got Lorenzo Walker, you guys are running, would you mind? We have a facility. If you can share your expertise and apply for this job growth grant and fund it completely from the Florida Job Growth Grant, and that's how we did it with Glades. I wish I knew more specifics on how they're able to. I think it was 50,000 is what they raised their starting salary to. I'd have to look into it, but I would say it's because they have a lot less teachers than us and a lot less overhead costs and a lot less schools. They probably,
Maybe 3 or 4 schools.
yeah.
When we do comparisons of districts, we look at like size districts, number of students, FTE, those kinds of things. And Glades would not be a comparable district to us. Charlotte also would not be a comparable district to us because of their size. But we sometimes look to Lee because they border us. But we are given by the state our benchmark districts of who we, our top 5, actually the 10. 5 above and 5 below our size in the district, and that's what we tend to look towards. But good question.
Okay, is that it?
Who are those comparable districts, if you
I can
could?
send you the list. I don't have them off my head,
No
but,
problem.
I have them.
yeah,
I know Clay is one, right?
no,
I
No.
think they used to be, I don't know.
they used to be, they aren't any longer.
Basically, we take,
Volusia, St. John's, Palm Beach,
Seminole,
Seminole,
Lake.
Lake. There's 10. I'll send them to you.
Okay.
What we do, we take the 5 above us in FTE and the 5 below us in FTE. That way we're right in the middle.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we have 2 things for you tonight. One of the proposals is something that Mr. Lewis is going to speak to, and that's on employee discipline. I think it's easier to put that way 'cause there's no picture on
Getting on the clips back.
Union U15 is a proposal on the section of the collective bargaining agreement that deals with employee discipline. We're proposing additional language to section 3.14 of the CBA. The new language provides for a defined progressive discipline policy with definite steps ranging from informal contact through separation with the employee. It includes a provision for omission of steps where the seriousness of the act requires omitting steps between lower steps and the discipline that you arrive at. And this puts us in line with other districts that have defined and known steps in their progressive discipline policy. And we believe that although it rewrites the current 3.114, we believe it still operates in the spirit of the old 3.14 and then provides employees with more clarity as to what is the discipline, the progressive discipline policy, and where does it start and where does it end.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes, I do. What do you mean by informal contact? What does that look like? Give me an example if you can.
Informal contact could be an incident happens, principal has a meeting with the employee, speaks to the employee.
So would that not be a verbal warning? What is I'm just trying to wonder what the difference between an informal contact and a verbal warning would be.
Well, I suppose if a principal walks by and sees an employee doing something that they shouldn't be doing, something fairly minor, like, let's say I am a teacher, principal walks by, and I am listening to music on my cell phone during duty hours. Principal looks at me and says, Mr. Lewis, I think you should turn that off. It's informal contact. I don't need to write up a report. The principal just asked me to turn off my music on my cell phone during duty hours, especially while I was managing or supervising students. A verbal warning is an actual warning based on an act that has risen to a level that requires warning. And in many institutions, including schools, and this is taken from I believe the Charlotte County School District, but similar districts around us has similar policies. Broward has a defined progressive discipline policy. Many of the districts around us have that.
I understand that. So can you give me an example of a verbal warning? What would make that a distinctive, because really if you're walking by a teacher and you're correcting them on something, isn't that a verbal warning?
It could be defined as that.
So at either of these stages, is a union representation required?
A union representation is always required if there's a meeting, the same policy that we had with regard to union representation for meetings where discipline could result, it still applies under this system.
Okay, so it would be, so I would contend that it might be a little difficult to do an informal contact because that could lead to discipline, especially if the chronic behavior of the teacher being on their phone might lead to further discipline. So would they have to contact to be able to do that?
No,
I just don't, I want to just be very clear so we understand kind of where you're thinking.
I view, and this is not just me, we view
Sure.
a verbal contact to mean an encounter that does not require a meeting with the principal. Something that you can address on the spot that's, hey, I don't think that we should be doing that, and you walk off. A verbal warning is actually, Mr. Lewis, I'd like to see you in my office to discuss XYZ. And in the office, we discuss it, and the principal says, I'm going to give you a verbal warning, and you leave that meeting. Scenario 2, where the principal invites Mr. Lewis to his office to discuss and ultimately mete out a verbal warning, a union representative could be there. Scenario 1, I think the speed at which it happens and the requirement or the lack of a requirement to have a follow-up, an actual formal meeting, probably not necessary because the behavior is corrected on the spot.
Okay.
And just to add something to that, to me, an informal contact could just be like trying to gather more information on something to see if it is an issue. You know, maybe something happened that the principal's not quite clear on and they just need some clarification as to, you know, what actually happened. So they're just asking questions together.
So then, but that wouldn't really necessarily be disciplinary. That's asking a question.
Well, you
That's an
don't
informal.
know if it's gonna be until you gather the information, maybe.
But then they would have an investigatory meeting, which we would then invite the union representation, because if at the investigatory meeting, there is revealed that there is some policy violation, then you would want representation at that meeting. I do have a question on the second page. It says any information relied upon by the superintendent to take or recommend disciplinary action against an employee shall be provided to the employee in the association upon request. Can you give me an example of what that may be? And then follow up with H, no non-disciplinary documentation shall be placed in employee personnel file.
To your first question, that provision lines up with ordinary due process. If we are hailed into a court of law, a civil court, we need to know what we are being accused of or charged with. If the superintendent is making a discipline decision, or the superintendent's appointee, principal, Human Resources Office is making a disciplinary recommendation against an employee, the employee should know all of the information.
So you're saying at the point of the recommendation for the discipline, then that would be provided? Is that what you're requesting?
No. I don't think that this is that specific, but because it says any information relied upon to take or recommend disciplinary action shall be provided upon request.
Okay. But at the conclusion of an investigation and prior to a discipline being issued?
It could, an employee could and should be able to request what do you say I did and what information.
Yeah, I'm just asking at what point.
Can I
because-
finish though?
Yeah.
The document says by the employee or the association upon request. It does not it isn't specific about a particular time. I don't think that anybody at this table believes that we can ask about an ongoing investigation while the investigation is going on.
Okay.
But once the investigation has concluded, whether discipline has been delivered or not, I should be able to ask, what do you have against me?
That was the clarification that I
Right.
wanted, thank you, I appreciate that. What about the H?
H, no non-disciplinary document shall be placed in the employee personnel file. So recognizing that Collier County is a public entity, we understand that public records for your common business, unless it's exempt by, by Florida statute 119 primarily and some others, unless information is exempt, we recognize that as a public entity, you're required to keep public records. H addresses a couple of things. There has been, we have observed from the union side,
We have, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the inflation rate right now in Collier County is 9.1%. We haven't had a cost of living increase in 12 years. And as we talked about earlier, the Collier County government is giving a 10% raise, including to the YRDs. If you look on Best Places to Live in Florida, bestplaces.net, the cost of living in Florida, if you use 100 as a reference point, the overall in Florida, the cost of living is 102.6. In Collier County, it's 113.4. Housing in Florida, in the state of Florida, is 102.6. In Collier County, it's 143. And the district response to this was to tell teachers to go get a roommate. Really?
When you say the district's response, was that published, was it shared, was it
Actually, we got it in an email.
from? Can I see the email?
The district office.
I'd love to see the email.
I think it came from Holly.
To
I
all
don't know.
district
I
staff?
would just close it out, find out.
Okay, I'd love to see it if you
I mean,
could.
I have it on my computer, but that was the response, to tell teachers to get a roommate.
Yeah, and I don't mean to interrupt, but can I address that for a second?
Please.
Dr. Ollie Phipps in our office was hired to help employees, not just teachers, but employees, find housing in an area where our county has chosen not to take any action on affordable housing and essential housing. I have sat on that committee for 7 years. They are still in the same place they were 25 years ago. I've lived here for 40, so, and in all good intent, that may have been shared as a solution because housing is limited, housing costs are high, and that obviously is not something that we in Collier County Public Schools can control, but we are helping to work with the county on making that change. And that's something that, maybe something that Tiger might want to get behind as well.
But I'm sure you can understand
I
how
do.
some people
I
took
do.
that message.
I do.
Okay, and then as we talked about, as John talked about when he addressed us at the beginning, the district's going to be debt-free in 2026, and they are able to pay cash for the new high school. But you've got to be able to have teachers to staff that high school. People are dying here. We have got to have some relief. We did talk about the fact that we need recurring money. Our mortgage payments come due every month, our car payments, our electric bill. Stipends and bonuses are all well and good, but that's a one-time thing. We need recurring money. We have people that say they're ready to change, I have remaining years left, but I'm going to have to change careers. I can't do this anymore. Unless you have two incomes in your household, some people are just drowning. And we talked about the fact that some administrative folks have had like 28 and even higher % increase in 3 years. You know, we're in a teacher shortage. These are people that have no direct contact with students. Students have to come first. And we look at people at the top of the scale. People at the top of the scale get nothing. These are your veteran teachers. A stipend does nothing for them with their FRS. And I know it's not your fault that the state keeps putting all this money into beginning salaries.
Well, not only that, there are restrictions. The governor and the state has put restrictions on how we pay salaries. And unfortunately, the grandfathered schedule, if you're on the grandfather schedule, cannot be paid any more than the performance schedule. And there has to be a 50 to 75% gap between what someone on the performance schedule receives versus what someone on the grandfather schedule receives. So there are very strict guidelines, and there are strict guidelines on the teacher salary increase monies as well. And the governor's intent was to pay teachers on the performance schedule. So we do have restrictions, which is why our proposals for grandfather will never match performance.
No, it'll never match because the performance is always going to be higher.
And it has to by statute.
And that's the purpose of it, to try
Correct.
to get people to give up their grandfathered rights.
Can we talk about that for a minute since we're here, the grandfathered rights?
Yes.
What does that mean? What does that to you mean, grandfathered rights?
Could I answer that?
Yes.
Okay, so the right of tenure under contract, under the old contract law. So it's actually a property right that belongs to a person who has, after so many years.
Sure, you get a continuing contract.
Yeah, you got that, and you get a continuing contract, and it makes it harder for you to lose your job over simple disciplinary things, and also during times of recession, et cetera, that normally occur. And so when the state shifted and said, oh, well, we're going to pay you more for performance under the guise of there's actually data that shows that you know, all these value performance models are accurate and those kinds of things, which 10 years later now we know that it's not true at all. The data is there to show that value added models did not work. None of them worked, and don't really make any change in terms of teacher performance or student performance.
I would contend in Collier County, with 85% of our highly effective teachers, is one of the reasons why we are in a district for as long as we have.
So
we do have good correlation between how our teachers score and our student performance data and how they're being ranked in the state. And but that goes for everybody in your unit.
But
That's not just
yeah, so
grandfathers.
right. So well, let's go back to that. It's a property right.
No, I understand that.
And so the state is trying to force the individual to give up a property right by having these basically pitting the younger teachers against the more experienced teachers who have this benefit that the state wants, and also the organization as a whole, because it's more beneficial for you, for the organization, not for you personally, but for the organization to have more power over the individual member, to be able to say you're dismissed. It's much easier under the current laws. And so the trade-off is going to be, well, we're going to give you the possibility to make more money, and then the other framework that it does is it pits teachers against teachers.
How? Explain that to me.
How does it pit teachers against other teachers?
Do you go
Because
up to
we
another
have
teacher and ask them if they're on annual or performance? I mean, how
Okay,
does
so
that?
how it pits is the competitive edge, because you get a pool of money that has to be split between the people that get effective and highly effective, and so we pit based upon the indicators that 2 points. I'm a highly effective teacher. versus just an effective teacher. With these things that are really, that the meta-analysis has shown are not valid measures of teacher performance and the teacher value in the classroom. And those are widely published studies. So that's just the definition in terms of the property right, because you're asking, so what are these rights?
No,
Well,
I
it is-
know
it
what,
is a
I know what
property
the,
right.
I know what the rights are, but what do you, so, and I'm gonna refer to my principals. Principals don't look at at an employee's contract. They, whether they're grandfathered or whether they're annual, they don't look at that. They look at what is happening in the classroom and they observe them and they provide support, and we provide a growth model so that you all can perform, so that our students perform, because the outcome is that you are successful and that our students are successful, so our district is successful, right? I mean, that's the main purpose why we're all here.
We would hope so.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess it is concerning to us as a district that new teachers feel like because they're on an annual contract that they're less worthy, or they should fear being on an annual contract. Do you have the statistics of how many folks have been non-renewed in our district in the last 5 years?
Probably not many, because you need to fill the seats. Let's be honest. I mean, listen, we've got, in our building, we've got a ton of long-term subs, and
So
every
then-
day we're doing, so
then why would you dissuade or discourage a teacher who's on a performance schedule or someone who's on a grandfather schedule that is actually leaving thousands of dollars on the table from making a choice to move to the performance schedule when they know they're going to?
Oh, I wouldn't dissuade them, they have the choice.
Absolutely.
We all have,
But what
we
you're
all have
saying is
the
you
choice.
pit people against each other, and I guess I
No,
don't
I'm saying the
understand
system pits, it's the system that,
But it is the system that we have to work in. But as a district, our view is, we need teachers. We need good teachers. We need good teachers that are going to empower our students to learn and perform and excel. Because when our students excel, we all excel.
well, I agree, and probably your principals would too, because they're the ones,
Everyone.
managing that
Everyone
that
excels.
issue.
Absolutely. So we're not in the business of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're not in the
I
business
have
of
to
making it good.
disagree with you, because it happens, and there's two people sitting at this table where it happened to a colleague of theirs, because the principal didn't like a license plate that was on a teacher's car, and she went from being highly effective to all of a sudden in February, she was the worst teacher in that school and was non-renewed. So it does happen. It only if it happens once, it's an issue.
Can I, may I please? April's next, and then you can.
You asked the question, do we go and ask teachers if they're on the annual contract or not? You don't have to. The annual contract started at a certain date. So anybody that was hired after that date, it's pretty easy to figure out whether they're on the annual or grandfather, not to mention most of them would tell us anyways.
But some have moved over.
And some have, I
Last
understand
year,
that.
we had 25 move over
I understand
because it
that.
was a better
But
situation for them.
And maybe the principals can answer this. Being a teacher, your evaluation is very subjective. If you go along with your principal, if you do the extra mile, you do things, I think you're gonna get a good evaluation. If, for whatever reason, you and your principal butt heads, if it's a personality conflict, you're not likely to get a good evaluation. It may not be terrible, but it may not be great either. Our evaluations are very subjective. You're not gonna know whether or not we've done a great job until the VAM scores come in and we get that back, or the kid's score comes back. And there have been times, I can tell you, as I watch through the year and look at my kids and who's doing their homework, who's participating, where the parents are, me bending over backwards trying to help them, giving them test corrections, spending extra time with them, helping them get into an after-school program, doing all those things. Until they actually take that test, and if it's a bad day that day and they take that test, it doesn't prove anything. It's one test. So a good principal going in and going for the look-fors as opposed to the gotchas, yeah, that's great. But I think it's gonna be hard for anybody in this room to sit there and say that every principal is going to be fair, because this is a Collier County family, and the larger the family is, the more personalities are there. The more personalities you have, the more possibility there's gonna be for conflict. I'm not saying that it's a good teacher and a bad principal. I'm not saying it's a great principal and a bad teacher. There are personalities there. So, but our job every day, and what we do is very subjective. A principal can walk in and see something that they don't like, and that's
With a policy violation, and something that may not be good for the health, safety, and welfare of students. That's the only reason we would let someone go. Not just because we don't need them. Believe me, and we're short in our office, so I understand being short and covering. We were down 5 people in the highest hiring season we had. We understand that we need to pull people out from under a rock somewhere to help fill classrooms, but we also have to support them. And we have trained with our principals time and time again. Support, coach, support, coach. Give them a year, give them 2 years. Maybe it's not the school, let's get them transferred. We with this bargaining, we negotiated language that supported transfers in the middle of the year. We've never had that before, ever. But we have principals that say, you know what, not my personality, not my personality. 2 personalities agree, they swap teachers, and it's a beautiful thing. I've seen it, we've done it multiple times. Because we're in the business of saving people and retaining our folks. Because we believe in teachers. Community may not, but we're in the business of education. We're an education enterprise. We have to. So,
To get back to her saying that, you know, why teachers are afraid to leave from grandfather to...
Sure.
To make a long story short, and we all know this, all principals are not created equal. Enough said.
and neither are teachers too. So people are unique.
But teachers don't have power over principals. Principals
No.
have power over teachers. That's the biggest difference, I think.
I understand, but because of that, because we want to provide an opportunity for all teachers to earn equal wage and be valued, we put mechanisms into place to prevent unnecessary dismissal of teachers. We have
I
to.
would, sorry, I would ask that you look at not just the non-renewal, because a lot of times it will get to the point where the principal will say, if it comes down to it, I'm gonna non-renew you, and that person resigns in lieu of that, and so it doesn't show up in your data as a non-renewal.
Absolutely, bring them to us, bring them to us. They come to you, I know they come to you, not just you, but I mean your union, so please, bring them to us. Andy and I will have that dialogue with them all day long.
You asked the question, why would somebody not leave the grandfather's schedule to go to the performance when there's thousands of dollars on the table? I worked in the state of Connecticut for 31 years and I had tenure and I had job security. I would stay on the grandfather's schedule. I would give up the thousands of dollars for job security. Because when I came down here 4 years ago, I feel very vulnerable. I feel like anytime that I voice my opinion, or I state something that, you know, or I have a question about something, I have been met with this kind of negative, like, you better just stay in your lane or else. And that has happened to me 3 times since I've been in Collier County. So I will tell you that job security to me is just as valuable as those thousands of dollars. And I would say to anybody who's on the grandfather schedule, don't leave the grandfather schedule. It's not worth it. Having
Okay.
had job security for 31 years, and now I don't.
All right. Before I give you...
Sorry to have done it.
That's okay. It was all things that needed to be said. Before I give you our new proposal, I just want to say that we have gathered more information. We don't feel like our information was complete. And I'm going to ask Jimmy Camp to share some research with you that he did that explains why our proposal is so different this time.
Well, you Well, you talked about it, you've lived in the community a very long time, as
40
as
plus
I
years.
have as well. I just started my 25th year. And my concern is this, and it always has, Collier's been an expensive place to live regardless, okay?
They've had a housing issue for 28 years.
I agree. And what you said in terms of the political process, I certainly agree with, and we see that in, some of the elections for county commissioner, et cetera. But here becomes the bottom line to this in terms of keeping our teachers. That from 2019, if we look at the data from the Census ACS survey, now the 2021 data doesn't come out till later this month, but what I did is I took a similar type of number that they would have used in terms of rental trends, and rental property has almost doubled in the past 3 years, the cost of rentals.
And across the nation, not just in.
So here's what that means in real dollars though, is that means that basically someone would have to get given that rate of increase that we had here in Collier County, that someone would have to make at least, we would have had to have received a $12,000 raise over that for that 3-year period, just to keep up. And so I'll put it in some very real terms as well. We have an employee of the district, not early stages, not late stages in terms of longevity, but the individual was told that their rent in September, or at the end of September, is going to go up $500 a month.
We have a lot of stories of those, especially our local cappers.
And this is a single person.
Yep.
Okay? So we have to be able to come to some kind of something that's going to help these people, because as teachers, we're community members, and we deserve to live and work where we work, and have the political voice within our community and be valued members of our community. But we're getting pushed out, and so if that means that maybe elected officials need to step up to the plate, and property values going up and all those kinds of things, there's a windfall that's going to come from that just naturally. And even if you left your tax rate the same, and we all know that no one likes to pay taxes, but there comes a point in time we have to say that this is worth it. And so I think that's going to be reflective of what we're asking for.
Okay.
Okay, this is a two-part thing. I'm gonna put it with one clip, but it's two separate things, but it sort of goes together.
Okay, let me take this one.
Okay, this proposal was put together after we completed our information, and I
Have their benefits paid for.
As well as their families?
It would be their benefits package. But that is your executive staff, your senior management. They also receive by the state a different retirement package as well, but that is FRS and legislative approved.
Okay.
Your superintendent also receives a different, it's kind of like the sheriff and the deputies, they all have different classes, special class types of retirement. Yes.
Okay.
But that is only executive and above. That doesn't include directors, coordinators, the majority of people on this list. That is a very small handful of folks because of the work that they do.
So I have another question. I'm sorry, Steve, just after we finish or whenever we do complete bargaining, do you guys bargain immediately after we complete our bargaining?
Non-bargaining doesn't bargain because they're not a bargaining unit.
Well, I'm saying, do you guys get your raises after we complete this? I think you guys normally follow what we do, right?
Well, it's been typical based on the superintendent, but it is not a requirement. That non-bargaining can be paid at any time during the process. But it has been typical for this superintendent and the board to approve at the last unit to close. Non-bargaining would go to the board for approval at the same time.
Okay, thank you. My final question, and I want to ask any more.
No, that's okay.
How do they calculate your percentages or your increases? How do they do that?
What do you mean?
Well, if you're at 163 now, what is the possibility of possibly going up 10, 15% next year? How do they calculate
Oh, no.
what your next step is going to be?
So there are no steps and there are ranges, and then that is publicly sourced information as well. You can go onto the compensation website and look at the compensation manual. There are ranges and minimums of each of the categories of employees, exempt versus non-exempt, anyone that sits in the non-bargaining, what we would say unit, but they're not even a unit. Their percentages, except for principals and APs by statute, are required to be paid on performance. So they get paid on performance as their rating of highly effective or effective. And there must be a 75% difference between your effective and highly effective. So last year, I believe, and don't quote me, I will bring that next time. If, say, if non-bargaining, all folks in this unit, except for principals and APs, receive a 2% increase, then principals must receive 75% more than that. So they would get a 2.75 increase. Highly effective principals. Effective principals would only get the 2%. And so non-bargaining has not received anything over 3%.
That's hypothetically. We're talking about 2.75% is hypothetical, right? That's just
That's a hypothetical.
Okay.
But what I'm telling you is, over the last 7 years, non-bargaining has not received anything over 3%.
They need a union. Said they need a union.
3% has been the increase. And last year, if you were at the board meeting, we did have a non-bargaining employee come and explain the same concerns that you have. They cannot afford to live in this community. We have technicians, SSTs that work in your building. You have to remember that less than 1% of the district employees, over 7,000 employees, are administrators. And when I say administrators, that's coordinators and above. Less than 1%. The majority of our employees are school-based employees and all that support staff. So in the district office, they have specialists who are very much like our OCAP folks. They make hourly wage. But you can look at that, Ken, on the compensation website in the interim compensation manual that is posted on the compensation.
I thank you, but wouldn't it be easier for them to put it on the Collier County Public Schools website where we could find it?
It is.
I've been looking. It's hard to find.
So go to Human Resources,
I'll show you.
click on compensation, click on the interim compensation manual. Step, 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 step. Very easy to find, very easy to read, and you can see what the minimum hourly base salary for each of these employees' categoricals are. And again, I'll reiterate, the district office and those considered in the non-bargaining unit have not received anything over 3% in the last 7 years. So, we'll caucus.
Can I have one question?
Yes.
Pam?
I have a
And
question.
then,
What's-
Steve did have a question, I'm sorry.
What's the last date we would need to ratify to get it to the November board meeting?
To be approved before
Oh,
the election.
the last, let
It's probably not even, is it a board meeting in November, or would it be the last one? I'm not
It'd be
sure.
October.
The board meeting in October is, OCAP is going to the board meeting in October. They would have to complete by no later than the 30th of September. If you're going to the November board meeting, which is on a Monday, it's November 7th, it's the day before the election, we would have to have ratification by the 28th of October.
Okay, so that's ratification, that's teachers.
You'd have to have ratification and closure and ready to go to board, because we have to get the board items out to the public at least a week before.
Just came up. What percentage of your budget is put towards teacher salaries?
I have to look exactly for teacher salary, but overall salaries, probably around 80% if I were to guess, but I don't have the numbers in front of me. But typically it's about 80% of our budget is people. That's
Is
our-
teacher salaries?
It's
People.
All salaries.
All
All
salaries.
salaries.
Yeah, I'm worried about teacher salaries right now.
Well, he has to look that number up.
As Valerie mentioned, less than
That's what
1%, less than
I want
1% is
specifics.
administrative, so the majority of our staff, 3,100 is teachers, then we've also got bus drivers, nutrition services.
I'm with you.
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't
At
want the
least
general.
one day I will.
Yeah, I don't want the general, I want specifics.
Yeah.
Would you provide that information,
Sure,
John?
yeah, we can. And keep in mind too that we also, the board pays medical and life insurance. And that's no cost to an employee. That is different in Charlotte and in Glades.
You're right, you're right.
So that is an additional cost and a benefit.
Steve?
Can I ask a question about
You can.
a previous item? Non-renewals. You mentioned that over the years you've blocked non-renewal requests from principals.
Mhm.
I was wondering, are those available for us to see, public records? And also, have you noticed any patterns over the years, if a principal is non-renewing for reasons that are not for the greater good of like the public school mission? Like if the principal wants to get back at a teacher for personal reasons?
Patterns?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that there is a pattern, other than there are performance concerns and policy violations. So there's usually a combination of performance and some disciplinary concerns. As to your first question, repeat that?
Are the requests to non-renew from principals, are they available for public record?
We don't technically have a formal document that they complete. If they they put a name on a list, and if they request a teacher to be looked at for non-renewal, and they don't have the paperwork to support it, there would be nothing to share, but,
Okay.
I mean, you could make the request and we could see what we have, but offhand, I wouldn't be able to tell you that right now.
Yeah, I think it would just be, curious to see what a principal's rationale would be to non-renew and then they were denied. I'd just be curious about that.
So those rationales are not written, there's not a written rationale. There is paperwork that comes, it's usually the evaluation, performance documentation, and that's all contained in a personnel file of an employee.
Okay.
And we don't keep that, the other thing is, when you think about keeping files, we don't keep all of that file with the employee.
Mhm.
And if you're asking, you'd have to ask about a specific employee to know about their non-renewal process.
Okay.
We don't keep them that way, so,
Okay. Thank you.
all right? Good, we're gonna caucus.